He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content and support us at patreon.com/CryptidClues.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am your host, Taylor, and today we're talking bipedal, 2 legs, 2 feet, left foot, right foot. Before we get into that, a couple of plugs. You can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, X, YouTube, and Facebook. Additionally, you can send us an email via cryptidclues@gmail.com. If you have any questions, just want to say hi, that's the place to do it. So, these past few weeks, I have been joined by Reuben, and we've been discussing Bigfoot poop, cryptid energies, just some really good conversations that have been shedding light on those topics. So go check those episodes out on our feeds. But now in regards to today's topic, the inspiration for it stems from a video I found while just scrolling through the internet. It says inspiration seems to work these days. So now when we look at Bigfoot, the big kicker here is that it's a humanoid type being that walks upright on 2 feet. But in case you didn't know this already, certain primates also have been recorded walking on 2 feet in an upright position. Notably is the golden snub-nosed monkey, which is in fact what I saw the other day and had felt this sudden surge of inspiration to talk about it. Now, before we get to the snub-nosed monkey, I just want to highlight that not all apes and primates are walking around on 2 feet. There's still a very select few of them that actually exhibit forms of bipedalism. Now, that term bipedalism means, and I quote, a form of terrestrial locomotion where an animal moves by means of its 2 rear or lower limbs or legs. An animal or machine that usually moves in a bipedal manner is known as a biped, meaning 2 feet. So, we have chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, gibbons, and baboons, all of whom can walk on 2 feet. And this doesn't mean that it's what they do 24/7 like a human being. In a nutshell, great apes and other non-human primates, they're designed for forward leg movement. And on top of that, we also have to look at our feet. Human feet have evolved uniquely among primates, losing an opposable first digit in favor of our pronounced arc, which enhances our ability to walk and run upright. Now, if we're going to bring Bigfoot into this, we can see footprint casts show a flattened arc, wide heel, double ball, and it's fairly squared off at the toes. So, as we discussed, humans have that noticeable arc, which is maintained by ligaments, and the muscular pull on the tendons. Now, after a certain body weight threshold, these structures would not have the sufficient strength required, and the arc would thus be forced to flatten. So while adult Bigfoot prints are flat, a number of supposed adolescent Bigfoot prints reportedly have arcing, which is suspected to be due to their lesser weight. Now, you can take that with a grain of salt. Do I have the photos to back that up? I do not. I tried looking for it. That information stems from just individuals talking about footprints that they had seen out in the wild themselves with their own encounters. So again, we can be apprehensive, but that sort of does make sense at the same time when you think about it in comparison to adolescent Bigfoot that are more so human-sized in weight and height in comparison to a full-grown heavyweight 9 foot tall adult Sasquatch, but I digress. Now, with primates, gorillas for example, they have opposable thumbs on their hands and semi-opposable on their feet. Their big toe is actually longer and placed lower on the foot than a human big toe. Chimpanzees have an opposable toe, also called a hallux, and this faces the other 4 digits and allows them to actually grab objects. It helps for climbing trees as well. Chimpanzee knee joints, they're lightly built, and so they technically cannot rest their weight on one leg at a time for long periods. Now, when we look at early on human knee joints, however, much more stronger, this allowed for early humans to regularly support their own weight one leg at a time during walking. But why do primates do it? Many theories suggest that bipedalism is just an adaptation to getting around on land. What is clear, though, on this is that early bipeds had begun to evolve when grasslands became increasingly common due to forests retreating. Now, they put a date here of about 4.8 million years ago. When I say they, I mean just a mutual theoretical understanding, a group of scientists that just kind of like came to this conclusion looking at the evidence and how different species evolved with bipedalism. Now, walking on two legs made it easier to forage and travel around on the ground, but not for super long journeys, essentially only in those areas that require it. Hence, we're going to turn to the golden snub-nosed monkey. I've included a link in the episode description below. It's to Disney's YouTube channel, and basically it is footage of these monkeys walking through the snow. Now, granted, they are much more smaller than a human and significantly smaller than a Bigfoot, but it's the way they move that hit me, and it just triggered me, so to speak. Like, I thought, wow, the way that their legs are moving, there's just a striking similarity here to a Sasquatch. And there is a little bit just in the way how big they are and the way they look. It reminded me of Sasquatch. Now, if you are unaware of what that is, they are a Zububufu. If you ever watched the Zububufu show with the Crap Brothers, they kind of move on an angle like a lemur almost. And that is the type of species that Zububufu is Sasquatch. Now, this species is within the order of primates. Now, they don't walk like the golden snub-nosed monkeys do. As I mentioned previously, they sort of move at an angle sideways, and they're kind of hopping as they walk. It's really cute. But let's just circle back to the snub-nosed monkey here and just give a brief overview of them for you guys. So they are old world monkeys, and they exist in the largest primate family known today. Now, old world monkeys and apes all diverged from a common ancestor between 25 and 30 million years ago. This monkey resides in the small mountainous forests of southwestern China. And these forests are subject to frequent snowfalls, a lot of colder temperatures than most primates are comfortable in. And this results in a better than average resilience to these colder temperatures than any other non-human primate. So its diet varies with the seasons, but it is primarily just a herbivore. And as we mentioned prior, this region experiences these frequent snowfalls, which leads folks to believe it is the main reason why this monkey walks on 2 feet. It's similar to the idea that we discussed before with forests retreating into more open grasslands. Now, if you watch the video as well, you'll see that the trees are thinned out and spread out, resulting in an almost non-existent tree canopy. This forces them to trek along at a ground level, but it's the way they move and walk over things that just really instilled the idea of Bigfoot into my brain. So here is my concept I'm putting forward, my theory, baseline perspective as of now. Take it with a grain of salt. Pacific Northwest Bigfoot has been sighted in trees. Dare I say, more the adolescent ones, because as an adult Bigfoot, it's just your sheer size and weight. I'm not disregarding the fact that an adult won't climb a tree, but I think it's more so the young ones that are seen in these encounters. So with how treacherous the Pacific Northwest can be, how heavy of a snowfall we can get out here, maybe after years and years, centuries, Bigfoot adapted to this environment. Probably longer than centuries now that I think about it. But we know in some reports they're capable of moving on all fours. In those more terrifying encounters, witnesses say they see something walking upright on 2 feet. Then suddenly they will drop down to all fours and crawl like a spider almost, very quickly and very, very freakily. So hypothetically and for fun, let's say at one point these creatures used to get around on all fours. They had to adapt and change as the years went on and basically acclimate to the increasing snowfalls of the Pacific Northwest. Colder winters, more treacherous terrains. It's a bold perspective, I know, but to me, there does seem to make some logical sense here when you have something that is crawling on all fours and it's just snowing and deep snow, and maybe they get to this point like the golden snub-nosed monkey where, hey, we can actually arc ourselves back a little bit and we can walk on our 2 feet through these large areas of snow, walking over things. Having such big feet helps because they can get better footing as they trek along. I'm just looking for the logical and scientifically proven facts in a similar but different species that could very well have real world applications. And that's just something I love to do on this show with Reuben, because Do we know all these things about Bigfoot? No, we don't. But we can look and we can compare. I've said this many times. We can compare what we do know about similar species and other types of animals that exist on this planet and see how those applications could apply to a Sasquatch. My favorite thing is that Bigfoot do tree knocks. And very recently, within the past few years, we have primates smacking the roots of trees with sticks, making specific signals and actually using it as a form of communication. That is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. So it's those things that get me really excited, and that's why I wanted to talk about this, because we have this monkey that is in southwestern China walking through the snow, and the way its legs are moving, the way it treks along, just really makes me think, okay, well, maybe that's the case. Maybe Bigfoot was not always bipedal, and maybe it was something that just evolved. I'm sure, humans, there's a whole can of worms and another rabbit hole to go down when you look at how we've evolved into being more of a bipedal species, but I'll save that for another day, maybe when Reuben joins me for that. But I digress. With those details all hashed out, I wanted to turn the back half of this episode into some encounters. So, our first one, and I quote, Hood River County, Oregon, 1980. My girlfriend and I arrived at Wattom Lake early one evening. After parking, we hiked down a forested trail to the lake, which sits in a valley 300 or 400 feet below the road. On the trail down, we had passed several campsites with young, noisy campers, drinking, playing boom boxes. The lake is surrounded by forest and thick brush. Now, a trail circled the lake, through the thick brush with clearings every couple hundred feet, each with a fire ring for camping. We followed that trail to the opposite side of the lake where there were no campers, found a clearing, set up camp. We were dismayed when sometime after dark, another group of young campers arrived at the next clearing. About 100 yards down the trail, set up camp. They began to drink and carry on, playing music until close to midnight. When they finally quieted down and we were able to crawl into our dome tent and go to sleep. Sometime later, I was awakened by very heavy footfalls coming down the trail toward our camp. As I lay there on a thin mat, I could actually feel ground tremors. As this thing got closer, now wide awake and quite alarmed, I lay there, unmoving and listening as the footfalls suddenly became much lighter, as if it were walking on tiptoes. Yet, it was just outside the tent. Now, we had some dishes soaking in the lake, maybe 20 feet away, and I heard them clinking as if something was messing with them. I then heard it as it headed off down the trail in the opposite direction from which it had come, this time heading towards the campsite occupied by the noisy teenagers. Once again, the footfalls seemed to get heavier as they receded in the distance. 5 or 10 minutes later, we heard a young girl scream, followed by men yelling, all coming from the campsite where the teenagers were. It soon quieted down, and we went to sleep. I woke at dawn, made coffee, and started to head down the trail to the teenagers' campsite to ask them about our nighttime visitor, only to find their campsite empty. They must have left really, really early. Now, while sleeping in the open on the shore of Green Lake in the Three Sisters Wilderness, I heard elk approach within a few feet to drink from the lake. I had sat up, and they scattered in every direction. But what I heard here was different. It was walking on 2 legs and was very, very heavy. End quote. Now, of course, this isn't any visual confirmation associated with this, but what we do have is a series of consecutive events that resemble other reports that we discussed on the show and beyond, where individuals are sleeping, or at least trying to sleep in their tent, and suddenly something is detected to be walking into their campsite. The idea of the dishes actually being left by the water for cleaning is particularly intriguing, because whatever this thing was, it's scouting for food. Like any animal, I reckon, would do, you wander into a campsite, animals go in there because you've got food out. They're going to be smelling something good. Now, the dishes obviously are probably half clean or being cleaned, whatnot, who knows, but they are away from the tent, which was smart. But it was obviously inspecting the residual remains of where food was, whatever this thing was. So the young teens, however, I'm bold in saying this, dare I say it, of course, aren't probably particularly conscious of food packaging when out in the bush, especially if we're going back a few decades. I think you can be a little bit more careless and laid back, especially when you know there's tons of other people camping at a campsite. You're probably you're not thinking forward in that sense. And again, I realize that's bold, But I don't have any gauge of assumption regarding how old these noisy campers were adjacent to our main couple, just that they were noisy teens, as it said in this report. But I do reckon that whatever maybe was sneaking around these campsites, it had detected something of interest within this noisy campground here, at least the site where these kids were, or teens. So to end this episode, we have one more encounter for you guys, and I quote, "I make no observations regarding the following. It was, as I have written, August 23rd, 1960, British Columbia, Canada. I had been out on my own for 6 months, living by competing at rodeos. I was just 16, and I had just finished a rodeo in Washington and had a couple hundred in my pocket. 3 fellow hands asked me to go with them on a canoe trip in BC to get their winter meat. Their names were Jim Palmentier, Kid Cuillin, and Earl Condon. Jim and Kid were sons of French trappers with native mothers, and they had lots of equipment and knew the area to the north and east of Risk Creek. Now, we would launch the freighter canoes, 20 feet long with 7.5 en-route kickers at a place near Horsley, east of Williams Lake, and go north and east from there up a string of lakes and rivers. We took 2 canoes with 35 gallons of spare gas, spare prop, 100 shear pins. We had a tent in each canoe, rifle, shotgun, 2 fishing rods, 1 tackle box, bedrolls, and grub box. Now, we traveled light because we knew there would be portages, and we knew we could shoot anything as we went. The word portage refers to the practice of carrying a canoe or another boat over land to avoid an obstacle on the water route, such as rapids or a waterfall. We had 20 pounds of flour, salt, pepper, tea, lard, pemmican, and tobacco to give to natives that we had encountered. The word pemmican is a concentrated mixture of fat and protein used as a nutritious emergency foodstuff. Native people use it to get through hard times. It is a varying mixture made of dried meats, fruits, berries, and nuts, and is highly nutritious. Some of the oral history handed down by Native Americans say that pemmican was traded back and forth between different Sasquatches and peaceful natives years ago, often in trade for fresh meat and fish. So, my friends were from 20 to 23 years old. I was the baby. The first 2 days were uneventful. We made good time, moved steadily up a series of lakes and creeks. The first night, we camped at an abandoned mine of sort and dined on fresh fish and rice and beans. Day 2, the streams got narrower and swifter, and we had to portage. Still, we made nearly 50 miles, and in our canoe, Jim and I, we had our Winchester, model 110 30-06, and my 12-gauge, model 12 pump. Ducks and geese were everywhere, and we had those for dinner the second night. Fixed with some French name I can't recall. You pick them, rub them with lard, and season them. A green branch is bent in a U and inserted into the cavity, and they are suspended over the coals. Best duck I ever ate. On day 3, Kid and Earl in the lead canoe rounded a bend and shot a young moose of about 600 pounds. Now, we spent 4 hours dressing and boning, caching the meat on an elevated platform. It froze every night, but we were at the base of a small lake, and as we were working, 3 canoes with natives came down the lake at full speed. Kid waved them in. There were 4 males, grown-ups, 2 teenagers, 3 grown-up women, and a girl about 10. Now, we gave them about 100 pounds of meat and some flour, tea, tobacco. They spoke no English, at least not in front of me, and I understood not one word except twice when one of the women said Sasquatch and laughed. At the time, I assumed she was making a joke for me, but they left after giving us 3 big white fish and some pemmican. So we took maybe 20 pounds of prime meat, caching the rest under a tarp and some bark. The platform was a standalone cache for that area, about 12 feet off the ground. Then we went on, still heading north and east. We left the small lake and went through a chute into another lake and then east into a smaller river. And this stream was maybe 40, 60 feet wide and medium swift. About 7, we started looking for a campsite and found one on the north bank in the bend of the river. The right bank was covered with boulders, rounded by glacier and current, but the left bank was clear with a flat area under some trees. We were all tired and hit the sack before full dark. It doesn't get dark there until tomorrow. So sometime, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, Jim and I were awakened by a loud crash in the campsite. We're thinking bear. So we grabbed our guns, kicked back the tent flap. Nothing. Jim had a flashlight, and he turned it on. Earl and Kid were now out of their tent and armed. A boulder about the size and shape of a bowling ball had destroyed our Dutch oven and part of the cookbox. We stood around trying to sort things out when a second boulder hit Kid and Earl's tent dead center. It came straight down through the trees. I was standing there, open mouthed, when both Kid and Jim grabbed me and Earl and dragged us deeper into the trees. Naturally, there was a lot of discussion, but I won't relate the tenure of that. We spent the rest of the short night in a circle, back to back, safeties off. From time to time, we would hear more rocks hit, and once, just once, some of the strange hooting from the other side of the river could be heard. After a good sun-up, we slowly crept back to camp. One tent was toast, as were the cookbox, most of the cooking equipment. I counted 9 rocks ranging in size from bowling ball to beach ball size. The largest weighed about maybe 150, 200 pounds. Fortunately, the canoes were undamaged, and we quickly pulled up the camp and started out. We got to the meat cache that morning, and it was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Totally 100% gone. No logs, no rope, no meat, no carcass. I have no opinion. We ran wide open, going out and camped that night in the canoes in the middle of the lake. Since then, Jim and Kid have passed on. Earl, I don't know about, but I'm certain of only 5 things regarding that trip. Those rocks were not on the bank where we pitched camp when we pitched camp. They were not carried into our camp. They were thrown. No human being did it. I have no desire to ever go back into that country again. I'm not a believer or a skeptic, but I don't exactly dismount much of which I don't understand. Try and throw a 150-pound boulder across a 50-foot stream. I saw it done, and I don't know what did it. End quote. This experience is quite the journey, and I love how detailed it is. Just like our first case, the food is gone. It's a remote area without much human activity, and the impression stands that they aren't wanted in the area. I have to wonder, too, they are omnivores. They eat both meat and vegetation. Bigfoot, at least that's what I believe. So when you have human beings come into their territory, firing their guns off, killing lots of game, lots of ducks and geese, and even a lot of four-legged friends of the forest, maybe they didn't like seeing that, and maybe they did something that it really bothered them. At the end of the day, it could just be an animalistic thing where, hey, you got food? Well, I'm going to take that food. Food is currency out there in the animal kingdom. So maybe it just came to squaring off and fighting off for what you have, and that's what they wanted, because there was no trace of what happened to their meat cache. That thing just disappeared. So whatever it was, it definitely had a good dinner payday. It made out like a bandit, that's for sure. But that's it for this week episode of Cryptid Clues. Thank you for tuning into it. Remember, you can find us on X, YouTube, Facebook. And if you want to reach us directly, you can do so via cryptidclues@gmail.com. I'm going to chat with Reuben, see what he's up to for next week. And I've got a few topics lined up. Again, we're almost in October. I can't believe it. Time is flying. And because we're getting in October, well, that means that we need to start getting into some spooky topics. Bring in a heavy dose of paranormal. There are some paranormal tours that they do around this time of year where I live. And where I'm at here, there's a few little towns that are very old mining towns and logging towns, and so there's a bit of rich history there. Now, there is not a lot of hauntings that take place because out here in the Okanagan, they're relatively new. If you want older buildings, you go over to like the east side of Canada, and even in Europe, you're dealing with centuries old structures, stuff that has history attached to it. A lot of things are very new along the west side of Canada. So that being said, it's not totally devoid of the odd little hauntings. And so that's where some of these smaller towns have ghost tours and little adventures that you can partake in that divulge a little bit of information about certain hauntings that take place. So that's going to be my goal for the next month. Maybe hop into one of these tours, get a little bit of information, and then report back to all you guys so you can learn a little bit more about what's going on in the hauntings of West Coast Canada. Thanks again, everyone. And remember, take care and stay safe. Bye.